You know, I've built a lot of decks on this channel, and I generally do so with very minimal assistance. Typically, the most I'll use is an EDH rec page to give me some starting examples if it's a deck I'm unfamiliar with, or I'll hand it over to a friend and ask for a once-over on the deck to see if there's anything that I might have missed. But one thing I have not done before is asked this hunk of junk to make something. So I think we're going to go ahead and give this a whirl and see what kind of terrible shit ChatGPT comes up with for a commander deck. I'm going to go ahead and use one of my favorite commanders of all time, Dina Soulsteeper, and let's see what it generates. So we're going to ask ChatGPT to make a commander deck based on Dina Soulsteeper. Let's see what it does. So it goes ahead and says, sure, Dina Soulsteeper is a fantastic commander for life gain and drain strategies. Here is a list for a Dina deck that focuses on gaining life, draining opponents, and utilizing the graveyard. Well, let's go ahead and go over what this thing just concocted. Right, so according to this AI, the strategy for this Dina Soulsteeper deck is life gain, utilizing creatures like Soul Warden and Ajani's Pridemate to gain life and grow our board. Ajani's Pridemate? Really? In Dina? Okay. Using cards like Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat to drain life from our opponents whenever we like. Okay, that's fair. I get that. That makes sense. That makes some sense. Graveyard interaction. Leverage creatures like Scavenging Ooze to manage the graveyard and gain additional life. Okay. And card draw. Incorporate draw spells like Night Whisper to maintain your hand size. Feel free to swap out any cards based on your play style or what you have available. You might want to add more removal or tech cards depending on your local meta. So let's go ahead and get the first thing out of the way. When we look at this deck, there's a couple of issues. First of all, Dina Soulsteeper is a Golgari commander. She only has 2 colors. And this deck wants to be an Abzan deck. And with the lands that it is suggesting, we only have 35 lands. It says that we have 35 lands on ChatGPT, right? 6 forests, 6 swamps, 4 plains. Okay, that's wrong, but that's 16 lands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 extra lands. Okay, so that's 25 lands, not 35. So we have a total deck with 58 cards. Well, maybe we're on the right track at least. What does it have in here that we can use? Well, it has 2 copies of Sanguine Bond and 2 copies of Altar of Dementia, because for some reason ChatGPT lists Sanguine Bond as an instant or sorcery. Man, I really feel like technology has failed us. Maybe we can't use AI for this. Maybe this is one of the many ways in which AI just kind of fails. Well, what kind of things does it actually have in here? It mentioned Ajani's Pridemate for gaining us life, but Ajani's Pridemate gains a 1/1 counter whenever we actually gain life. That doesn't help us at all. Gary's in here, which is good, and I agree with the Scavenging Ooze, and Sarah's Ascendant is very powerful, but again, it's a white creature. We can't play that. Well, I guess we're gonna go ahead and make this video fixing ChatGPT's terrible AI deck. So come with me while we go ahead and take this exact strategy and make it not suck. And we're gonna do it for a shoestring budget. Alright, now that we have taken out everything that cannot fit into the deck because it's a white card and Dina cannot use any of those, and we've sorted everything so we know what everything does, let's go ahead and take a look at what we are left with. We have a 4-card aristocrat package with Blood Artist, Essence Warden, Sanguine Bond, and Zulaport Cutthroat. That's a pretty good start. Our draw package is really light with Sign in Blood, Night's Whisper, and Midnight Reaper. Our interaction and removal package is actually pretty substantial for this kind of a deck, with only 5 cards out of the 36 that the deck actually has left. We have 2 Oops I Win cards with Exquisite Blood and Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Exquisite Blood automatically wins you the game the nanosecond you drop it on the board with Dina. So, normally I would not run this in a deck because I don't like winning games that way, but since the AI did put it in here, we have to keep it in because it was originally part of the spirit of the deck. All we are doing is building on its foundation. Then, we look at the ramp package, and we have a Crypt Ghast, a Cultivate, a Golgari Signet, and a Soul Ring. Now, I'm not normally one for a Golgari Signet in any kind of green deck, because we just don't need it when we have access to green ramp, but hey, it's in here, so we've got to include it. Then we have an Altar of Dementia as a sack outlet, and a Whip of Erebos to revive creatures from the graveyard. Then we've got the basic lands and a couple of dual lands left. And again, we are left with something weird with this Golgari Guildgate in a non-guild deck and nothing to do with it. It's just kind of a tapped land. But again, it is something we're gonna have to keep because it was part of the foundation that the AI forced us into. So let's see how we can flesh out this deck and what we can improve on it. We're left with a couple of issues. The deck is only 36 cards deep, 15 of which are our lands, so we're gonna have to flesh out our land section and see what we can do. We also need to establish what our goal is going to be. So let's say that we have the $53 that we were forced to use for the initial deck. Let's go ahead and say we're going to only add another $15 on top of that, in the spirit of my normal $15 decks. This should give us a bit of a high budget for the entire deck, but ultimately we have to only use budget cards to supplement what the AI gave us. So, with a budget of $53 initially, adding 15 to that, we can only end up with a $68 deck given a few cents. So, let's go ahead and see what we can come up with. Now, I am very lucky when building decks like this because I've already created a guide that will make it very easy to find what we need. I open up my lands guide, which I've talked about in previous videos, and just type in Golgari. This takes me immediately to all of the Golgari lands we have available. There's the Guildgate that we don't want, a Festering Gulch, which we don't really need, a Haunted Mire, which we will probably use so we can ramp into it, Tainted Wood's really easy to fit in, Viridescent Bog is really easy to fit in, Golgari Rot Farm is easy to fit in our budget, and a Necroblossom Snarl may be a bit much if the printings are too expensive. And since most of the printings appear to be about 60 cents minimum, I don't think we're going to be able to fit that in there. As much as I would like to, we do only have $15 to work with, so this is where all Golgari lands basically stop. Next, we can move down to our fetching lands. If we can't use actual dual lands, we should be able to add some lands that can fetch into our deck regardless. Ash Barrens fits the bill here, Terramorphic Expanse fits the bill. We can't use any of the landscapes as they can only be used in 3-color decks, but Escape Tunnel fits the bill as well. And moving down a bit more, Myriad Landscape works, Urza's Cave would be nice, but it's $2, and regular fetch lands are a bit too expensive for our blood. So we are going to have a handful of fetching lands and not much more. Finally, we can go ahead and check on utility lands we can use to fill out anything else that's not going to be a basic. I use Control F, go to utility lands, and I start with the black ones. Hidden Necropolis doesn't fit the bill for us because we don't ever really want to spend like 6 mana on a card. Blighted Fen makes target opponent sack a creature. That could be useful as a removal spell, but we don't really need it too terribly much. Howltooth Hollow is a hideaway land if a player has no cards in hand. Unfortunately, this means that once we start getting to things like Havengul Laboratory, we're paying 85 cents per land, and we just don't have the budget for that. So we scroll down instead to the utility lands green and see what else we can find. As much as I would love to put the Shire in here because it generates food tokens and our commander really likes us gaining life, we can't really fit it in. Gingerbread Cabin can make a food token as well, though, if we have 3 other forests. So this may actually fit the bill pretty well, especially because we can search this out of our library. Next, we go to the dual-colored utility lands, and we see that there is one that fits our bill perfectly with Grim Backwoods. It's 27 cents, and it lets us sack creatures to draw cards. That's perfect in a deck like Dina. Still on the utility lands, let's go ahead and see what we have as far as MDFCs that can fit within our budget. Tangled Flowahedron is a nice bit of ramp, but we are very low to the ground, so we don't need the extra help from that. And because our creatures are very small, cards like Colony Ambush will do us absolutely zero good. Zoth Consumption fits the bill a little bit. It does make every opponent lose 4 life, and we gain 4 life, and it's very budget friendly, but at 6 mana, it's really hard to justify fitting that in, since at 6 mana in an Aristocrat deck, I want something that's borderline winning the game. Looking at all of our other options, the only real thing I would want to put in is Hogramauling or Fell the Profane, and they both break our budget a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and avoid them and skip running any MDFCs in this deck, as much as I would really like to. When we go to the colorless utility land section, we have a virtual candy shop of things to pick from, and scrolling through them, Ominous Sanitary is already a really interesting card for us to consider. We can exile it to put any creature into their owner's library. That's a free removal spell in a deck that is very, very low to the ground, so we're going to go ahead and include that. Going a little further, Haunted Ferngraph lets us put any creature from our graveyard into our hand at random. That's really, really good. So we're going to go ahead and put that and the next card, Pit of Offerings, which lets us remove cards from our opponent's graveyard. After that, cards start getting about 20 cents and higher, so we don't really need to worry about them too terribly much. They start getting a little too expensive for what our deck is going to do. Those Scavenger Grounds actually could be a really fun way to threaten everybody's graveyards, so we're going to go ahead and include that one as well. After all that, we just add about 3 more forests and 2 more swamps, and we are up to 35 lands, which is a respectable amount for an Aristocrat deck that is very low to the ground. This gives us 6 dual lands, 6 fetching lands, 6 utility lands, and of course it gives us 17 basic lands. And most of our lands don't come into play tapped outside of the ones we were forced to use that do come into play tapped. Ultimately, this used up $2 of our budget. Now we have $13 left to use on the rest of the deck. And there are 44 cards to put in the deck with that money. So let's go ahead and see what we can do with the rest of those. The next section we are going to work on is going to be ramp. And if we take a look here, I happen to actually have a ramp guide as well, which I've done previous videos on. So everything in here is sorted by price. If we go ahead and click on sort by price here, and we're going to go in, I'm not going to really update to cheapest because I like the arts being on here as they are. So let's go ahead and see what we can do to flesh out our ramp package. Mirror Convert is 4 cents as a mana dork, and I really like including him in a lot of decks, but I don't think he's super necessary in this deck, all things considered. I don't think we actually need mana dorks for this particular build. So instead, let's look down and we see that we have Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth. Both of these may actually fit the bill perfectly because they are 1 mana ramp that we have access to in green. Next, we make it to our artifact ramp packages, and Wayfarer's Bauble definitely fits our bill as something we should use. We don't really want to use most of the mana rocks as we do have access to green, so we're going to be skipping over most of them, except maybe Honored Heirloom as a way to deal with other graveyard decks. Then we move to land fetching. We see Dawn Treader Elk and Font of Fertility are 10 and 15 cents each, so they are probably perfect for what we are trying to build. Emergent Sequence searches our library for a basic land and puts it on the battlefield tapped, then turns it into a fractal. That could be useful in some situations, but I don't like letting our lands be super vulnerable. So instead we move on to Farhaven Elf, Search for Tomorrow, and Rampant Growth. Each of these for 30 cents and under is giving us exactly what our deck wants. We do need one more type of land fetch though, and that is going to be Wood Elves, because Wood Elves is going to be able to grab us a forest specifically out of the deck. This ultimately leaves us with a nice 12-card ramp package, with one of those ramp cards serving double duty because Cryptcast has an extort ability on top of the ramp that he gives. So he's honestly not really here for the ramp specifically, but he is still providing a very valuable resource. Now that we've got our ramp package fleshed out, let's see what else we need to worry about. If we look at the Aristocrat section, it's actually in a pretty good spot. I'd like to add a couple more though, just to make sure that the deck is going to be a little more powerful. I don't have any guides for this one, but I do know of some budget options we can grab. We're going to be adding a Vindictive Vampire to the list, as well as a Falcon Wrath Noble, and finally we are going to be throwing in a Marauding Blight Priest. Marauding Blight Priest does the same thing as our commander. When we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Falcon Wrath Noble and Vindictive Vampire are the 4-mana equivalents to Zulaport Cutthroat and Blood Artist, which say when any creature dies on our board, either a target opponent loses a life or every opponent loses a life. In either case, we gain a life. The actual damage that comes from these is inconsequential sometimes, though, because Dina Soul Steeper says anytime we gain a life, each opponent loses a life. So we are just going to be doubling and tripling up on that. This means we need to move on to our next section that needs work, and it's going to be draw. Now, while the options that are here are good, I think we need to go ahead and use my budget draw packages to see what other options are available for us at really low costs. The things that come to mind immediately are doubling up on Midnight Reaper's ability with Grim Haruspex, but that would include adding in a 91-cent card, so we're gonna go ahead and skip that. Hostile Negotiations, though, is 20 cents, and that's kinda perfect. Greed cares about us gaining life to get lots of cards, so that fits the bill immediately. Read the Bones gives us draw and scry in exchange for life, so these are all perfect options so far. We are a deck that cares about sacrificing, so I think Eviscerator's Insight and Costly Plunder will do us a world of good as well. And since we have such a low-to-the-ground deck, cards like Feed the Infection and Ancient Craving wouldn't be bad to include, because we aren't really spending the mana on big spells to begin with. And since we're including the 4-mana draws that make us lose 3 life, we may as well go ahead and chuck in a Harmonize, which will draw us 3 cards without losing any life. Nothing else in the budget green package here really does us a lot of good. This leaves us with a 10-card draw package that honestly is fairly respectable for a budget deck. And overall, with all of our additions, we've only used about $5 of our total budget. We still have $10 available for the next 26 cards in the deck. The next section that I really want to flesh out, though, is going to be this interaction and removal section. We want to make sure our opponents can't win the game too easily on our clock, so let's see what we have access to in my budget removal section. Feed the Swarm already sticks out to me because even though we have access to green, we don't have access to lots of money, so Feed the Swarm is probably one of the best options for removing multiple types of threats. Royal Assassin also lets us destroy tapped creatures, and this is going to cause us to have a lightning rod that our opponents are going to want to get rid of instead of our commander. So this fits the bill as a pseudo protection piece while also blowing up problematic cards. Plaguecrafter lets us sacrifice himself to blow up all kinds of creatures, so maybe we should include a few of these Plaguecrafter-like effects in the final version of the deck. Moving on to the removal cards in green, Reclamation Sage and Cankerbloom let us blow up artifacts and enchantments, and both get to be creatures with sacrifice clauses to help with our aristocrats, so they fit the bill perfectly. We could also add in Outland Liberator, since it does the exact same thing as Cankerbloom, to flesh that out even more. Moving on to the 2-color interaction packages, I've got a video for that as well, so let's go ahead and search Golgari and see what fits in our particular budget. Right now, Binding the Old Gods, Mortality Spear, and Putrefy all stick out to me as perfect cards to throw into the deck. They let us blow up non-land permanents, artifacts or creatures, or non-land permanents with ramp and an extra ability to boot on top of it. Atomize would be great if it didn't cost so much money, same with Abrupt Decay, so let's go ahead and stick with these 3 and move on to the next section. This means we've been able to flesh out our interaction package to a 14-card interaction set. This includes ways to blow up multiple types of cards with Binding of the Old Gods and Mortality Spear. We've got the ability to get lots of artifacts and enchantments off the board with Cankerbloom, Outland Liberator, Return to Nature. Scavenging Ooze gives us access to removal of graveyard cards. Phyrexian Revoker can stop problematic single cards. Accursed Marauder is supplementing the Demon's Disciple and Plaguecrafter package. And all in all, this puts us in a really solid spot. I also forgot to tag a couple cards, so it's actually a 16-card interaction package. It was not being able to find the Plaguecrafter that kind of gave it away. Now, we see that we've got two other packages that really need fleshing out. We need more ways to recur creatures to the board, and we need more ways to sacrifice our cards besides just our commander. I think since our commander's a sack outlet, maybe only adding 2 or 3 other sack outlets should be enough. And maybe about 4 different ways to get creatures out of the graveyard at minimum, since we are going to be reviving them a lot in order to keep sacrificing them later. So let's see what we can find. I went ahead and did a Moxfield search for return creature from graveyard to battlefield, and I decided to sort it by USD so that everything is sorted by price. This lets me see a giant spreadsheet of all of our possible cards. Badlands Revival already fits the bill for me. It's at 6 cents, it returns a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield, and then gives us other permanent recursion. So we're going to go ahead and add that. Looking at Diregraph Rebirth, we can return a creature from the battlefield, and it has flashback. And it costs 1 less for every creature that died this turn. For 7 cents, that's basically a steal. Rise of the Witch King can recur a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield and also force everybody to lose a creature, so that's honestly a no-brainer. And Dread Return can be recast from the graveyard by using its flashback ability, so honestly there's no reason not to include that. Whisper Blood Liturgist lets us sacrifice 2 creatures to return any creature to the battlefield. That's really easy to abuse in an aristocrats deck, so we're gonna go ahead and include that too. Altar of Baal works really well in these style decks as well, so we're going to go ahead and include that since it's here. And because I didn't want to show footage of me scrolling all the way down to it, yes, we will be including a Vat of Rebirth. Next, we're going to look for those sack outlets. I've gone ahead and done a search sorted by USD for sacrifice a creature : in quotation marks. This should bring us up every single card that is worded exactly like our Altar of Dementia and only let us see those cards. So let's go ahead and scroll through and see what we can find. Dimir Houseguard is already a perfect card. We can sacrifice a creature to regenerate it, meaning it can survive board wipes, and it's a free sacrifice a creature ability. There's no reason not to add that in. Vampiric Rites lets us sacrifice a creature to draw a card, and it's an enchantment so it will dodge most board wipes. That's honestly a steal, and at 2 mana for the ability, I'm perfectly willing to pay that in most games. Evolutionary Leap hurts the budget a bit at 30 cents, but we've honestly used such low-cost cards up to this point, I think it's an easy include. We sack a creature to reveal cards from the top of our library till we hit another creature card. Honestly, I don't see any reason not to include that at all. That's a free sack outlet that also replaces the card that we get rid of. And finally, Viscera Seer is a 1-mana creature that can sacrifice creatures to scry 1. There's no reason not to drop that into the board. And if we wanted to be mean, we could put in the Sadistic Hypnotist that can sack creatures to make a player discard 2 cards. I have used that in a deck before, and it made me feel like quite the villain, but we're not going to be adding that in here today. This leads us with an 8-card recursion package and a bunch of cards we still need to tag here that can get us all kinds of sacrifices. With everything tagged and organized, now we need to see what we are looking at. We have 96 cards in the deck, so we need 4 more cards, and looking at our packages, there is a problem that already juts out to me. In the recursion section, we managed to add in another way to remove a card away with Rise of the Witch King, and we don't really need more ways to remove cards when we are already sitting at 16 cards. There's also 2 things that are missing from this deck. We have no way to produce tokens, which is very important in an aristocrat build, and we don't have any board wipes. We can't fit enough board wipes and tokens in just the amount of cards we have available, which is 4, so we are going to trim down a little bit. From my interaction package, I've removed a Demon's Disciple and an Outland Liberator. The Outland Liberator does cause the grief of making everybody pay attention to the day-night cycle, and the Demon's Disciple is just the weakest version of Plaguecrafter and Accursed Marauder that we had access to. I'd like to remove the Phyrexian Revoker or the Murder, but those were included by the AI, so we have to keep them in this version of the deck. Then we look at our curve for the deck and see how much ramp we actually need. Looking at our mana curve, we have a mana value of 1.77 with our lands included, 2.84 without our lands, and a fairly sporadic curve with mana value of 2 being the most common in our deck. This means we probably don't need as much ramp as we included in the original package. So let's go ahead and find something that can take the cut. I went ahead and decided that Utopia Sprawl and Farhaven Elf needed to go. Farhaven Elf is really good in our deck, but it comes out after the curve of our commander, and it doesn't have an auto-sacrifice clause like our Dawn Treader Elk does. As for our other cut Utopia Sprawl, Wild Growth is doing the same job, except it doesn't mana fix us, but Wild Growth doesn't need to attach to a forest specifically. Since we don't have access to true fetch lands, sometimes we may be hit with only dual lands and no forests for a while, meaning Utopia Sprawl may sometimes not actually be able to see play. The two board wipes I'm choosing to put in are going to be Gaze of Granite and Necromantic Selection. I could have shown the process of finding these in the search, but honestly, I just knew these were the two I wanted to run. Necromantic Selection is perfect because we can wipe the board and then bring our commander right back, or really any other problematic piece, and Gaze of Granite is amazing at putting everybody on the back foot. Aristocrat decks are very low to the ground, so they can survive board wipes very easily by just playing a bunch of cards right afterwards and having a newly established board state. So being able to remove all of our opponent's cards, like Boldus' Citadel and Omniscience, immediately is a boon to us. So I've chosen Gaze of Granite. Now, I've played a lot of Aristocrat decks, so I already know that some of the includes that I would like to use are Ogre, Slumlord, and Ghoulish Procession, since anytime a creature dies, these will generate tokens. Dreadhorde Invasion generates tokens on our upkeep, Jadar generates them on our end step, and Ophiomancer generates them on every player's upkeep. These are all perfect includes in a deck like this, but this means we have 99 cards. And since our budget is $68, we have $2 that we can spare for any new token card. This is where we need to go ahead and ask another system to give us a bit of assistance. We need to find a good token card, and we don't know one immediately off the top of our head. So let's go to EDH Rex and let's see what we can find here. By opening this up, we can already see an area where we had a bit of a blind spot. By relying only on my budget drawing archive, I completely forgot that Moldervine Reclamation was a card, so we're going to have to make some cuts later. Let's go ahead and add that, recognizing that a cut will need to be made later on in the deck. We have the $2 to spare, so Bastion of Remembrance may be able to clean up our Aristocrat package just a little bit. We are a life gain deck, so we see Well of Lost Dreams here in the EDH Rex. Whenever we gain life, we can pay X and draw that many cards. This is another perfect include, and at 41 cents, we have the budget for it since we made so much room as we were building the deck. Another missed opportunity by relying on the stuff that I had previously made. Morbid Opportunist is in the EDH Rex area, so we can go ahead and add him in, and we will find space for him later on in the deck. Scrolling down a little further, we see that there was no kinds of token generation that fit our budget that really cropped up here, but we were able to find a couple of our deck's blind spots by looking through here in the first place, so it honestly worked out really well either way. Now that we've cleaned everything up, we see that we have about $1.20 left for whatever token creator we want to make. This did end up hurting us a little bit in terms of what we have access to, but this also made sure that our deck is a little bit better upon a second pass. So that's honestly okay in my book. Since the EDH Rex did not help us out, I've gone ahead and done a search for at the beginning of your end step with the word token included as well. This should give us any type of card that will generate a token the same way that Jadar would. So let's go ahead and scroll through and see if anything fits the bill for us. Immediately, Skeletal Swarming pops out to me. Each skeleton you control gets trample, and at the beginning of your end step, make a tapped 1/1 black skeleton. But if a creature died this turn, we make 2 black skeletons instead. That's actually exactly what we're looking for, and at that price point, it's a steal. This puts our deck's total up to $66.99 with all 100 cards accountable. This does mean that we have about $1.30, $1.40 that we didn't end up using out of the budget. So let's see if there's any area that can get cleaned up with that. The one that immediately sticks out to me is the lands. I still want to put that Necroblossom Snarl in, so let's go ahead and include that. After adding the Woodland Chasm in, or not the that's the Necroblossom Snarl, sorry, I completely forgotten it's 5:35 in the morning. That should round our entire deck out. Now, I don't need to do a whole deck tech video on this the same way I normally would. I think instead we're going to go ahead and just do a gameplay test and see how it runs. Now, we've mulliganed once to get this opening hand, so let's see what we have access to. We have Wood Elves and Cultivate for ramp, we have Blood Artist as a second copy of our commander's ability, and we have a Plaguecrafter for removal. This is honestly really good, and we have 3 different types of lands to begin with. An Evolving Wilds that'll come out on the same turn that it won't matter, since it's just going to be a tapped land, and we have nothing to play on turn 1, so honestly, we get to play everything on curve with this hand. It's a perfect hand. Let's go ahead and keep it. Drawing our first card, we get an Evolutionary Leap. We don't need to worry about it right now. We're just going to go ahead and sacrifice our Evolving Wilds, yank a forest out of our deck, and move on with our lives. The next turn comes up, and we have a Royal Assassin that we could play on the next turn. I think what we're going to do is get Viridescent Bog out, tap 2, and put our commander on the board immediately. We have a low-to-the-ground commander, so honestly, if somebody tries to get rid of it right now, it's not the worst thing in the world. Let's go ahead and just accept that it's out, and see what happens on the following turn. We draw into another forest, and we don't really need it, but this Evolutionary Leap could be a wonderful boon for us. So let's go ahead and get ourselves a little bit of mana and put a creature in play that the Evolutionary Leap can get rid of. This is where land-fetching cards that happen to be creatures come into play. Wood Elves does an amazing job here, since we can go ahead and play the Wood Elves, get a forest out of the deck, and then it will be ready to be Evolutionary Leaped on a subsequent turn. I chose to get the Haunted Mire out of the deck as my forest because, let's be fair, it says forest on it, so getting it out with Wood Elves is perfect. This also prevents us from drawing a tapped land on a later turn. So we can go ahead and play that forest, and we have 5 mana available to us now. This lets us go ahead and do this fun play. Blood Artist comes onto the board for 2 mana, and then for another 2 mana, we get to play the Evolutionary Leap. Then, for 1 mana, we can sacrifice the Wood Elves to the Evolutionary Leap to look at the top cards of our deck until we hit a creature and put it in our hand. Before we do that, though, everybody's going to burn for some damage. Blood Artist saw a creature die, so we get to aim 1 damage at someone. Then we gain a life. This triggers our commander. Now that we've gained a life, everybody will lose 1 life as well, meaning we've dealt 4 damage total with this strategy, and we've replaced our Wood Elves with a new creature. Let's see what we get. Whisper Blood Liturgist is the one that comes up, so let's go ahead and put that in our hand, and we have that free to cast on a subsequent turn. It's turn 5, and we've drawn Midnight Reaper. We are now also out of lands to play, so we have a couple of options. I think that the best thing we could do, as much as I would like to go ahead and get another land out now, is to cast this Diregraph Rebirth. This is going to go ahead and get our Wood Elves back from the graveyard, letting us fix that land drop that we are missing. I'd like to have just drawn one, but we didn't really get that ability. This time, Wood Elves is going to fetch a regular forest, and since it comes into play untapped, conveniently, we can use it to sacrifice the Wood Elves to Evolutionary Leap to see about what our next card is, and it's going to be Vindictive Vampire. That goes into our hand, and our opponents burn for another 4 total damage. The next turn is up, and we've drawn a Myriad Landscape. We're not missing our land drops this time, which is good, and we can go ahead and establish a pretty decent board. We have 2 cards that cost 4 mana that I'd like to play right now, but they're a bit outside of our ability. So instead, we're just going to drop the Midnight Reaper down to get a draw engine going, and pay a few more to play Plaguecrafter. This will get rid of a creature on everybody's board, and also give us a draw. And of course, because a creature is being sacrificed, everybody's burning for a grand total of 4 damage. Here's our draw from it. It's the Well of Lost Dreams. We have another draw engine ready to go. Now that turn 7 is here, we did not get another land, but we have a draw engine ready, so it doesn't matter too terribly much. We've drawn a Ravenous Chupacabra, so if our opponents happen to have anything super special on the board we need to be worried with, we can go ahead and do this now. Play the Chupacabra and kill a card. If there's nothing we need to worry with too much, though, we can instead spend a little bit of mana and get this Vindictive Vampire on the board and online. Now we've got a couple of options. With 3 mana, we could drop the Royal Assassin down, but I think because we've missed our land drop, it's okay to go ahead and play Cultivate. That puts a swamp on the board and allows us to play our land for turn as this forest, and since the forest is an untapped land, we have access to Evolutionary Leap this turn. Honestly, since Vindictive Vampire is here and it will let us deal 1 damage to every opponent, I think it's safe to say we can go ahead and get rid of one of the cards on our board. I want to keep the Blood Artist up though, so what we're gonna do is something a little nasty. We're gonna use this forest and sacrifice the Midnight Reaper. This will draw us a card, but because the Midnight Reaper goes away, we are going to get a lot of triggers here. Vindictive Vampire is going to deal 1 damage to all of our opponents. Blood Artist will deal 1 damage to a single opponent, and then we will gain life twice, dealing 3 damage to our opponents 2 more times. This gives us 10 whole damage across the entire board. And the Heart of the Card's Faith rewards us with a Morbid Opportunist, another version of Midnight Reaper to replace the one that we sacrificed. Now that we are on turn 8, we have drawn a Cankerbloom, which we can use to get rid of a problematic card. But let's go ahead and play Promising Vein down and get our draw engine back online. Paying 3 mana, we play the Morbid Opportunist, and let's remove a problematic card from the board by playing Cankerbloom. Paying a single mana sacrifices the Cankerbloom, gets rid of a problematic card like a Bolas's Citadel, and gives us a draw from the Morbid Opportunist. This also gives us 10 more damage from the Blood Artist, Vindictive Vampire, and Dina Soul Steeper combo. Looking at everything else on our board, we probably need to remove another threat. So let's go ahead and pay 4 mana. Ravenous Chupacabra gets rid of 1 threat on the board, probably somebody's commander, preventing them from doing something game-winning, and we sit on this board state for a second. The following turn, we are going to do a lot more to win the game. It's turn 9, we've drawn a Soul Ring, and that really is perfect, because we're going to go ahead and play that Soul Ring, then we're going to tap a bunch of mana and get that Well of Lost Dreams on the board. Now, when we gain life, we can use it to draw cards. Let's go ahead and pay 1, use the Evolutionary Leap, and sacrifice that Ravenous Chupacabra that we just don't need anymore. This triggers our Morbid Opportunist to draw us a card. This deals a lot of damage to our opponents, 10 damage to them in total, and also gains us 2 life, allowing us to pay 2 mana to draw 2 more cards. Then the Evolutionary Leap is going to dig down until it hits a creature, and once we hit that, our triggers will be done for the time being. This gives us an Essence Warden, which is perfect. We're going to go ahead and tap a forest to put a Wild Growth on this swamp, and then we're going to tap the swamp to get the Essence Warden on the board. Now, if we play any other creatures, we will automatically gain a life. So, let's go ahead and use that black mana from the swamp that's still sitting there, this swamp, and this Viridescent Bog, and we're going to play the Royal Assassin. I'd like to play Whisper right now, but I want to keep 1 mana open for the Evolutionary Leap. Royal Assassin touches the board, generating us 1 life, which of course burns all of our opponents for 1. Now, we're going to go ahead and pass the turn to our opponents. During their turn, we're going to tap the Haunted Mire at the end of the last opponent's turn and sacrifice that Royal Assassin if there's not something on the board we desperately need to worry about. This is going to cause a chain reaction of drawing a card from the Morbid Opportunist, using the Evolutionary Leap to dig until we find a creature, and of course, burning our opponents for that 10 damage. At this point, we're basically just playing for the fuck of it. We don't really need to worry about any specifics that are happening anymore, but if you wanted to see how to win the game here, you'd play the Dimir Houseguard, giving you another life gain and burning everybody for doing so. You would tap a swamp and play Vat of Rebirth, followed up by tapping your Myriad Landscape and tapping a few more lands to get Whisper out on the board. We're not going to use Whisper's ability, we're just letting the burn happen. We only need access to 3 mana to use our Vat of Rebirth, so we're going to use 1 bit of that mana to draw a card with our Well of Lost Dreams, just so that we have a healthy hand in case something goes wrong. Now we're going to use the Dimir Houseguard to sacrifice Whisper, causing everybody to burn for 1. Well, it's actually going to make them all burn for 10 total. Then we're going to sacrifice the Morbid Opportunist after we draw the card from it to do the burn again. Now we can sacrifice the Essence Warden to do the burn once more, and sacrifice the Dimir Houseguard to do the burn once more. This puts the 4th oil counter on Vat of Rebirth. After that, we can pay 3 mana, tap the Vat of Rebirth, and get the Dimir Houseguard back on the board, using his ability to sacrifice in sequence the Blood Artist, and then Dina Soul Steeper, and then the Vindictive Vampire to burn everybody for the game. After all, this turn we've probably done about 100 damage to all of our opponents, not counting the chip damage we've done over previous turns. It took a little bit to get there, but aristocrat decks are very low to the ground, and if you noticed, we basically kept a strong hand the entire time. There was never a point where we were out of cards. Obviously, in a real game, there would be a lot more back and forth, and we would need to worry about more options that we could have to get rid of opponents' cards. But the deck is stacked with plenty of ways to do that, and even though it began from humble beginnings of being generated by a really, really bad learning language model, I think what we've cleaned it up into is something that's quite passable, honestly. That said, I want to go ahead and see what y'all think of this deck. I wanted to see if I could do something like this, use my standard $15 budget to kind of sculpt any deck that AI would generate. What I wasn't expecting was AI to generate something that wasn't even a functional deck, both in lacking the amount of cards it needed and having too many freaking colors. But all things considered, I think I'm happy with how this particular Dina deck came out. We'll go ahead and call it a AI Dina, I guess, even though the only people who will understand what that means are people who've watched this video. Anyways, let me know what y'all think in the comments section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.